So, good evening. I was just telling people on the retreat here on Bere Island that the good news is the weather is going to end. The not so good news is we don't know when it's going to change. But you get used to anything, which is one of the qualities of human society, maybe for good or ill. But there is something very useful about, I think you get used to it on the island too, because you might get a couple of days like this when you can't see the mainland from here because of the low cloud. And then suddenly, and you have to accept it. You either accept it or you swim to South America. And but if you accept it, then it actually reveals something quite beautiful, and and then when the weather changes, it's the variety. Variety is. Begin with a poem by another Irish poet who won the Nobel Prize, W.B. Yeats, which I think captures something of what we have been talking about in terms of being fully present in the moment. But this poem is a very short little description of a mystical experience that he had in a tea shop. And it emphasizes something of the grace of contemplation. In the Christian understanding, this experience of contemplation, of full unbounded attention and consciousness, is not the result of a technique or of your own effort, although some effort is needed in order to put yourself in the way of the experience. But the actual nature of the experience is gift or grace or something that is, as it were, unearned. And that's what takes us by surprise. That's why the kingdom of God, reality, is always surprising and fresh and unpredictable and uncontrollable. Anyway, this is his description of this moment of grace. And again, he describes this in very religiously neutral language, apart from one word, bless. But that's the best word to describe that feeling of union, that feeling of benevolence, that feeling of radiant goodness flowing out of us and into us. So anyway, he says, I sat a solitary man in a crowded London shop, an open book and an empty cup on the marble tabletop. While on the shop and street I gazed, my body of a sudden blazed, and 20 minutes, more or less, it seemed so great my happiness that I was blessed and could bless. So, there's a detachment there, isn't there, in the way he's describing himself. It's rather kind of almost like an out-of-body experience in some way. A detachment, which in a way, I don't mean literally out of the body, because it's very physical, it's very tangible, my body blazed. But at the same time, there's a detachment from this level of heightened reality, which I think, when you read the Passion narratives in the Gospels during this week, you sense the same detachment of Jesus at his trial or in the Garden of Gethsemane. It's not being not present, but it's being detached from what is happening and aware of what is happening in an unusually free way. That's how I would put it. What do you think about those two symbols of the open book and the empty cup and the marble tabletop? What do they suggest about the nature of this experience? An open book, an empty cup, and a marble tabletop.
Open to receiving.
Okay, an open page, an open book. And you say you could read somebody like an open book, then they have no secrets, yes, okay, that's good.
Empty to be filled.
Okay, like a Zen, almost like that Zen story, if you can only fill an empty cup. And what about the marble tabletop? What's the image of marble? What's the association with marble? Or could be an altar thing, yes. Yes, marble, yes, maybe. I hadn't thought of that. Yes. What else? What's the quality of marble?
Cold.
It's cold and shiny and hard, yes. And rock-like, yes, something very hard and cold. And yet, clean, yes. Luxurious, yes. Okay.
From the web they say what an altar and a grave and a kitchen.
Very good. Thank you very much. We can't hear you. That's good. An altar, a grave, and a kitchen. Yes, very good. 3 ways we use marble. Very good. This is a very good literary class. That's nice. Yeah. So,
it's more. To me, it seems like more of setting my work down for a moment. I mean, he's got the coffee shop and he's reading and he's got his tea and he's concentrating, but something, he finished his tea and put it down and the book is down and there's an observation where you step away from your work, and I think that was the experience. He stepped away from everything. He became an observer for a while.
exactly. Yes, good. That's good. That's the next thing. It's quite true. He's not drinking because the cup is empty. He's had his tea or his coffee, and he's put the book down. And what's he doing? How does he describe it? No? Well, yes. Watching, but what's the word he uses? Do you remember? I've got it here, so it's easy. It's gazing. Gazing. Sometimes in the Gospels, when Jesus looks at people, sometimes it's translated, he looked intensely, or he gazed at them. And there's this element in much contemplative literature, mystical literature, of the contemplative gaze, or the divine gaze. And what quality is that? What quality does that gaze have? Okay.
Loving.
And loving, yes. When you gaze on someone, yes. If you really, if you're looking at somebody angrily, what do? You stare, don't you? It's the difference between staring at and gazing upon. Yes. So we were looking this morning at this first level of contemplation, which is natural contemplation, gazing on the world, and finding that you're friends with the world, and finding the beauty of creation, the vestigia Dei, the signs of God within the natural world. And so do that, gaze upon this weather, and then you'll be able to gaze upon the good weather when it comes. So so he's not just daydreaming, is he? I mean, sometimes when you're, sitting at a railway station, you just sort of look around and your kind of mind is a bit aimlessly wandering. But that's not the same as gazing. To gaze consciously, attentively, is a prayerful thing. And as I was saying this morning, to give your attention to anything with this quality of purity is to actually be entering into prayer, into contemplation. Doesn't matter what you're looking at. And what's he looking at? He's looking at the shop and the street. So he's sitting beside the window maybe, and sometimes looking into the shop at the people there. Do you remember there's a famous description by Thomas Merton when he went in from his monastery into Louisville, Kentucky to, I don't know, do something, go to the dentist. And he was just standing at the street corner, and suddenly, rather like W.B. Yeats here, he's filled with this awareness and this love for everyone around him. And feels this deep connection, this deep friendship with the world, just going on its ordinary ways. Nothing special is happening. It's a very ordinary moment, and yet he sees it, and his heart, his mind, his whole perception is thrown open, and the beauty of it, the goodness of it, the friendliness of it floods into him, rather like that idea of Seamus Heaney, that experience enters into you. Okay. And then, as he gazes on the shop and the street with this quality of attention, a poet's gaze, really, it's not just daydreaming, what happens? What happens? His body blazes. What does that remind us of in terms of the Gospels? Where do you see a body blazing? In the Transfiguration, isn't it? The Transfiguration, and ultimately, yes, I think the resurrection is this blazing of the body. Teilhard de Chardin said that spirit is matter incandescent. So when the material world, material experience, material perception is filled in this way with the reality that it is, that it contains, that it communicates, when you're open, as it were, to the God within it, then it blazes, it's transfigured, it's transformed. It remains what it is, but it is transformed or transfigured. Okay, so his body of a sudden blaze. This is a immediate experience, and for 20 minutes more or less. What does that suggest? What does that say? Was he looking at his watch? Why does he say 20 minutes more or less? What effect does that have on us as we? Time goes by. Yeah, it's in time. This is an experience in time, isn't it? It's like your 30 minutes meditation. Your body may not blaze every time you meditate, but it happens in time. And 20.
It wasn't just a flash. It was something meaningful. It wasn't just a transient thing. It actually stayed with him for a while.
Right. It wasn't just a transient thing. It was actually it endured. It had an endurance to it, and. This is also something you find in all the mystical literature. You find it in your own experience with meditation over time, of course, too, is that we have more and less intense experiences at times. But they are, we're not in this state continuously. It comes and goes. Why does it come and go? I don't know. What?
It keeps us coming back.
It keeps us coming back, yes. Why is it only 20 minutes? Why doesn't this last for the rest of his life? What's that? Yeah, maybe it'd just be too much. He wouldn't be able to pay his bill. Hmm? What? He'd be totally blissed out. remember when I was at university, I saw, when, at the end of the vacation, we came back, and one of my friends in our group had a religious conversion experience in Trafalgar Square. He had gone to a revival rally of some kind, and he was blissed out. He was just in this impossible state, and he was so nice to everybody, and the rest of us weren't particularly spiritual, but he was just so nice and kind to everybody and exuding this, and not worried about anything. And then he went to his tutorial. Every week you had to write an essay and go to your tutor and read the essay. And one week he went to see the tutor with this big smile on his face, and he said, I didn't do my essay. And the tutor said, why not? He said, I was too happy. So that faded, but he ended up becoming a priest, I think. So it changed his life, but that level of intensity, it isn't sustainable. So what happens to it then? What happens to it? What's the effect of that experience, that kind of experience? I suppose it is, in a sense, isn't it? It's a way of taking us to a deeper level of... we have to integrate that experience so that it doesn't stay on the surface, on the marble tabletop. It has to be integrated into our life. And that means you have to let go of it, transcend it, but then it becomes part of you. And it seemed so great, my happiness, that I was blessed and could bless. So this is the closest it comes to any sort of religious language. And yet it's, do you find it convincing, what he's saying? Yeah. Is there a better way of putting it? You know, especially because this religious language sort of stands out separate from the rest. The rest is just factual. And this has some level of interpretation or some level of perceived meaning. There's a blessing in this, but it's not just his blessing, it passes beyond him, out to the world. So, so we were looking in the last session at what we might call this first level of contemplation, which is where, through attention that we pay to the world, to our immediate environment, we are able to see into the divine presence, or the ground of being, or this blessedness within the very ordinary things of life. And this might be either infinitely great or infinitely small. The thing is that it has this quality of infinity or boundlessness, which probably is what creates this experience of blazing for Yeats here. It's the experience of transcending limits. So whether you're gazing upon, the expanding universe through the world's greatest telescope and seeing the boundless reaches of the universe, or whether you're looking into the structure of a cell under a microscope, or whether you are simply paying attention to what is going on in your life, to the people you're with, and to the challenges of your life at that moment. If you're attentive to that, this is the same experience. And so our usual quantitative materialism, the more the better, growth, economic growth, our normal way of saying that in order for things to grow, they have to become bigger, and have more of it, more money, whatever, more GDP, more possessions, whatever, more trinkets. This is undermined, this kind of materialism is undermined, because we realize that the infinitely small and the infinitely great take us to the same place. So we become free from this social conditioning of materialism as we understand it. The materialistic values which control us are suspended, and we experience the boundlessness, the freedom of the infinite. So we move from, that doesn't mean we move out of the material world. This poem, like the Heaney poems, like the Passion narratives, is very much about the material world, the physicality of it, and our bodies in relationship to the world. But what happens is that we move from, you might say, from materialism, the more the better, to a sacramentality, to a sacramental vision of the world. We see things in their meaning and in the quality of being that they have. And I think that's very important for our reading of the Gospels these days, because many of the narrative accounts are quite detailed. Jesus being brought before Pilate, or the arrest in the Garden of Gethsemane, or the Last Supper, or how they were sitting even at the Last Supper, the couches that they would have lain on. Not chairs sitting around a table like Leonardo da Vinci, but probably lying on cushions on the ground. So all these are details which attract our attention, but they're not just spurious details or prurient details. We're just unimportant details. They build up in a careful contemplative reading of the text into a sense that within these ordinary events there is a sacramental meaning. They are signs, they're symbols, they carry a meaning, and they are communicating something to us, even through the details. And that's a poet's vision too. That's how a poet, that's how Seamus Heaney saw the spinning of the wheel. This sacramental vision comes out of this experience of attention. And this also means that we recognize the difference between attention and distraction, or between higher and lower levels of attention. What we've been looking at in these poems is a very high level of attention. What we see in Jesus and his passing through his passion, is what the word means, his passing through his final hours. We see an intense engagement, an intense attention to what is happening, an intense sense of oneness with what is happening. But most of the time our attention is fragmented. It doesn't have this intensity, it doesn't have this focus. Normally our attention is broken up into little bits, as what we call distraction. We're broken up into the problems of life, dealing with the little things of life and losing the big picture at the same time. And our attention then very easily gets absorbed in the cyclical states of mind that we are familiar with and that often make up most of our conscious existence, whether it's anxiety or fear or trying to predict the future or whatever it is. These are states of mind that we get used to. They become habits. Of course, we don't even know that we're repeating these same states of mind. It's like something has got stuck, or there's a cycle of mental states that we go through. So I think we become conscious of that in these moments of grace, these moments of contemplation, these times of retreat. This is what a time of retreat gives us an opportunity to do, is to reconnect this capacity for attention, because we're not looking for something better, even better weather. We're in this quality of acceptance. If the weather stayed like this for the next week, what's the point in worrying about it? And aren't we missing something if we allow our habitual state of mind to reassert itself, the feeling of disappointment with reality? Reality isn't what I wanted it to be. We spend half our life thinking like that, don't we? That's the consumer mind. There's always something better which I can buy or which I can acquire in some way. So these times of retreat, these times of grace, these unexpected moments of beauty or bliss in our lives remind us that we can change our minds. Metanoia is what the word is the word for conversion that Jesus uses. It's translated as conversion, but it sounds as if we're going to convert to Christianity or to Islam or to some other religion. But it's not really what it means. It means a transformation or a change of the object of attention, the change of the direction in which we are looking. And maybe direction, the direction of attention is the most important, helpful way of understanding it. Simone Weil says, love is not a state, it's a direction. Love is not a state. We think of love as a sort of a romantic state or a blissful state or whatever, but think of it as a direction in which our attention is pointing. And then whatever we pay attention to becomes holy, because we see it for how and what it truly is. And the act of pure attention is contemplation. And it is also attention to God. Or it is prayer, because prayer is perfect attention. So that means we can pray at all times. That whatever we're doing, we're walking, we're eating, we're talking, we're doing whatever we're doing, can be done in this prayerful way, paying attention to what we're doing and gazing upon it in this loving way. Attention is love. Now, in relation to God, we can see how much this changes our image of God. We start off probably with a certain idea of God, a concept of God, which has to be abandoned or dissolved before we can actually get into the experience and let the experience come into us. And very often for religious people, it's this very image of God that blocks us. This is the peculiar thing. It's often religious people who are the least contemplative or the least open to the Spirit. I mean, Jesus pointed this out pretty strongly. He wasn't just attacking the religious leaders of his own time. He was making a critique of the tendency or the dangers of religion at any point in history and in any tradition. And he's clearly a contemplative teacher, a spiritual teacher. He's also a religious person. This is the interesting thing. He's also within his religious tradition. Today, or many people find it very difficult to combine these two things, being part of a religious tradition and being contemplative or spiritual. If Jesus did it, people didn't live in a secular age, but for us it's another kind of challenge. something that's very modern, very contemporary. And I think for many meditators, the experience of meditation, if they come to it from a religious background, as devout religious people, especially I think if they have had no experience of other traditions, will find meditation quite disturbing. Even maybe the notion of meditation becomes disturbing, because they're told you don't have to think about God. In fact, you shouldn't think about God. As Father John says, we're not speaking to God or thinking about God, we're being with God. Well, I've spoken to Christians and Muslims who find that very difficult and disturbing. And yet it's actually the wisdom of all the great traditions. So if I think you come to meditation within your own tradition, say within your own Christian tradition, and you've had some knowledge of or some exploration of other traditions, you may be a little bit more ready to experiment or to explore this. And that's why people often say, oh, I'm so glad I found meditation in my own tradition. I think that's why the Dalai Lama recommends people to stay in their own tradition, but to re-enter that tradition through the contemplative experience rather than just the religious one. So there's a transition here and maybe some turbulence, maybe a sense of losing your faith even, some people have. And that's what frightens them about meditation. And think of the anger that the Pharisees had against Jesus when he showed them his contemplative depth, when he spoke of himself as I am. They tore their garments. They said, what need have we of other evidence? This man has condemned himself. So there can be real anger, I think, when you feel that your view of the world, which also happens to give you a social position and a good income, when your view of the world is being challenged in this way. So no wonder the prophets got stoned to death or crucified in theocratic societies, even today. We see these horror stories of examples of fundamentalism, religious intolerance, the burning of assassination of other religious practitioners. So what happens then in this, as we open ourselves to this contemplative gaze, first of all through the experience of, as it were, natural contemplation, just seeing the world, and that I think is what W.B. Yeats is describing here, and Thomas Merton had on, I think, Chestnut and Forth, was it then? Chestnut and Forth, was it? On that intersection. This is a vivid, powerful, transforming, beautiful, blissful, blessed experience of God in creation. But this, doesn't stop there. It's only 20 minutes, more or less. And it doesn't solve all your problems. So, but it does trigger a movement into a deeper level of experience, of contemplation. You haven't finished the journey yet. And this may, in fact, only be the beginning of the journey. And what will happen then, if you have a pre-existing image of God, that image is going to change. If you don't have a pre-existing image of God, which I think for many people today coming into this contemplative dimension of prayer, of meditation, without any religious tradition, it's very important where they situate themselves. It's very important the community they feel connected to. because it's in that community, in that faith tradition, that their image of God, their idea of God, the way of system of belief, their way of describing, way of understanding, that's where they're going to get this language. So it's very, it's a bit precarious, but in a way, presumably the Holy Spirit guides us. But you don't want to end up getting into a cult at that stage of your spiritual journey. Or you don't want to end up getting stuck with a sort of a half-hearted kind of religious language that doesn't fully understand or accept the meaning of this journey. So that's the challenge for us, to the church today. Can Christianity really be a place in which, or Christian communities, Christian churches, be a place in which people who are beginning and entering this contemplative journey, a spiritual journey, can find the right kind of support and guidance and direction? That's our challenge. Or do you just, or are they just saying, "Oh, we've got another one," put him in and sign him up for monthly donation? Okay.
What do you think about that, though?
What?
Because you put it as a question. But what's your own experience then of that within the Christian traditions?
Well, there are good and bad, and not so good and not so bad. I mean, I don't think we can make huge generalizations about the churches. I think there are communities, networks, families, movements within the Christian body, within the Christian world, which are really hospitable and formative for people, in which they can grow. But I wouldn't identify those with particular institutions. You may have these pockets, these little networks, these communities that suit you, your temperament, your language, and so on, within an institution, but you couldn't identify it with the institution. Does that make sense?
Partially.
Partially. Okay. Well, that's not bad. Yeah, we can't just do a blanket dismissal or a blanket condemnation of all religious institutions. Depends on who you meet, depends upon the group that you meet, depends upon whether you can make the journey with that group as well, whether that group can open themselves to you, have the resources to do it, and so on. But it seems to me the institutions should be facilitating these kind of pockets of spiritual growth, formation, hospitality, and welcome. It's not the church that does it. It's these human communities within the institutions. Anyway. So what happens then to our image of God during this? I think we realize that we are not exploiting God. That's the first thing. In other words, for many religious people, God is there, transcendent, but we have lines of communication. We could do Skype calls with God. And we can do regular Skype calls and tell God what's happening. Weather's not so good here on Bere Island at the moment, but I mean, do you think you could you improve the weather a little bit? And these are the reasons why. And if you do, I think you'll find that you may get I don't know, you sort of bribe God or have this sort of dealing with God. So it's a very common form of prayer. that God is there to be appealed to in order to change circumstances. Now, there can be, that could be very crude, and there could be a deeper and more subtle form of that kind of prayer that isn't just magic. But I think through the contemplative journey, we realize that that is not actually what our relationship with God means. It's not about getting favors. It's not about trying to find a magical formula. But it's more about enjoying, or being with, or deepening your relationship, and becoming intimate with, allowing the relationship to become friendship. This is how Jesus calls his disciples friends. So if he calls his disciples friends, not worshippers, I call you servants no longer, but friends, because I have revealed to you everything I have learned from my Father, from the ground of his being. That's what he says at the Last Supper. If Jesus says that, and Jesus is indeed the Word made flesh, then this is God speaking to us about the kind of relationship that we should have or enter into with God. It's an intimacy, it's a friendship, it's a being with, not exploiting, not seeing him as a boss or as a dictator or as whatever, somebody superior in a sense even. I mean, friends is a very powerful image, transformative image to describe relationship with God. It's only the mystics who would dare speak about God like this, not the religious, external sort of religious leaders. I mean, you may on occasions have religious leaders who are also mystics, but normally this is not how we speak about God. It's not how the liturgy is phrased, is it? The language of the liturgy is speaking to God up on this throne. So the mystical language is very different. Simone Bere, I think, describes it as the difference between the language of the lecture room and the language of the bedroom. So the language you use when you're giving a lecture is going to be different from the pillow talk that you have in your bedroom. So the mystical wisdom speaks about this experience of God as an intimacy, as a friendship, rather than as exploiting a contact. And in this experience of friendship, what do we find? Generosity. This overflowing, this superabundance, which creates what we've seen in these poems so far, this feeling of gratitude, of thankfulness, of wonder. You know, there's no in all of these insights that we've been looking at, and indeed, I'm using these as an example to lead us into understanding the scriptures of this week. In all of these insight experiences, is there any mention of guilt or shame, or that we have to earn this experience? It just happens because it's meant to happen, because it wants to happen, whatever. So out of this comes the praise, that genuine praise that we heard in the words of St. Francis this morning. This overflowing delight and excitement and wonder at the nature of the physical world. And this is all the physical world we're still talking about. Okay. So we go back to St. Kevin and the playfulness of the poet as he describes this legend. There's a physicality to it, a tenderness to it. Although it is also deep, it's not superficial, and therefore it's sacramental. That's what we mean by sacramental. It's that we look at the surface, but we go beyond the surface. We see through the the obvious packaging or the obvious superficial meaning. And as we go through that surface level of reality and into the sacramental experience of the real physical thing, but now we're experiencing it in a way that is opening up what we might call an interior world or an interior experience or vision, we also find that we are relating to all things, not just to this particular thing, not to that particular tea shop or that particular intersection on the street or to that particular wheel spinning in the mud. But because of this contemplative gaze, this thing becomes something sacred and precious and yet remains ordinary, like the body. And it opens us to a sense of communion with the world around us. This is why you don't get fundamentalist mystics, you know? They're universal. The fundamentalists are still on the surface. They're still engaged with the labels, looking at the labels of things rather than at the things themselves. And I think that's what we see. This is the big change that's happened in the Catholic Church with Pope Francis's very strong language, rather just like Jesus speaking to the Pharisees, warning religious leaders of his own persuasion against the superficiality, this legalism, this sort of opacity, this opaque vision rather than this transparent vision. He's describing, and he hasn't done anything yet. Well, he reformed the Vatican Bank, which is no small thing, and trying to reform the Curia. But it's vision, it's perception that has changed. And that is a big difference. Things follow from that. Once you see things differently, then you act differently and you appoint different types of people and you shape institutions very differently. So through a deep attention to one thing, we break through into a science of love, into a loving gaze or vision on everything, and it becomes impossible. If you've had this, I mean, you may lose your temper, you may become impatient, you may be overwhelmed by your ego or your disappointments, of course, from time to time. But it would be impossible to remain, I think, once you've turned that corner into, well, the teaching that Jesus is giving us, into this contemplative vision of the world, this experience of the kingdom, both within us and among us. It would be impossible to remain, for very long anyway, in this negative, judgmental, dismissive, superior, condemnatory, fundamentalist, cruel way of being, which otherwise we can get stuck in, of course. So we move from the external to the real, from the label and from the opinion we have about things to the real. I think this is captured in the way John Main describes meditation, and in all of his teachings, he's not describing what meditation is like. He is saying, start it, get into it. Because if you stay only at the description, you're just never going to change. You'll just, become an expert on different people's opinions about meditation. And you'll think that you know something about meditation, or know something about the real world, but you won't actually have allowed yourself to fall into this experience. So he says, that's why he says, learn to expect nothing. Sounds negative, It's not going to be the greatest bestseller on the spiritual market, is it? And yet, what else can you say if you're going to be true to this experience and to the tradition that carries it? We have to be honest with it. He says we all start meditation from scratch, from nothing. And that would be true really of every meditation, the one we're going to do now. There is this sense of immediacy, of being in the present, and starting again. And yet, the journey is a continuous journey of starting again. It's the same journey, but it's new every time. He says it's hard to put aside our previous notions about the spiritual path or contemplation. So it's hard to enter into this experience from scratch without having some notion, some expectation, some preconception of what it's like or what it's going to be. We meditate, he says, so that we can dispossess ourselves, not just of our ideas, though, but of our very selves. And I think that's the forgetting that we saw in the poem on St. Kevin. Having stayed there and allowing this little bird to hatch its eggs, he then says, what does he say? He laboured to labour and not to seek reward. Well, that's what Father John is talking about here, the approach to meditation. It's what the Bhagavad Gita says, that you must work hard, but be detached from the fruits of your labour. Do the best you can, and then let God handle the rest. For he has forgotten a prayer his body makes entirely. He's reminding us here that this is still in the body. This is what Easter is about. And that's why it's a difficult thing for people to believe or to grasp or understand, because it's about a transforming of the physical, material world. But it's still the body. A prayer his body makes entirely, for he has forgotten self, forgotten bird, and on the riverbank forgotten the river's name. So, beyond labels, this forgetting. So, this leads John Main to say this: the essential motivation of Christian meditation is that we become absorbed in God. That's what St. Kevin is, clearly. We become absorbed in God, where we lose all sense of ourselves, forget ourself, leave self behind, and find ourselves only in God. The greatest joy is to enter this oneness in which all desire leaves us. It's not even that we have to abandon desire. That sort of makes us feel a bit frightened. We don't actually have to abandon desire, we just have to let the desire leave us. Why do we cling to desire? Because we cling to our images of what would make us happy, what would fulfill us. Whether these are very sort of material, crude, or very earthy, ordinary images of material satisfaction or possession, or whether it's slightly more ethereal and abstract, images of God. So we have to allow ourselves, through the process of attention, through this act of simple prayer, pure prayer, we have to allow the desire to leave us, to sort of drain away little by little. And again, we shouldn't underestimate that that can be a bit scary, because we identify so much with our images, our desires, our plans, and to find that these may be leaving you could give you a sense of panic, because, well, what am I? What am I going to do then? Just stand here with my arms outstretched all day, holding a blackbird. And this is why I think, for most of us, the journey we're making in meditation is not just a journey in meditation, it's a journey in a whole way of being. And it is a bit like the train we were coming down from Dublin on Friday, on the other day. It's a bit like stop and start. Now, it was interesting, when we left Dublin, the estimated time of arrival was more than 3 hours late. And I said to the guard, well, it doesn't normally take that long. And he said, no, we've calculated the delays. It wasn't actually a very good calculation, but because it was longer than it took. But we've calculated the delays on the track because of work they're doing on the track. So, therefore, it's going to take not 2 hours and 10 minutes, but 3 hours and a half or something. So, in a way, we probably have to do that. We have to calculate the fact that we're going to run into delays caused by our own resistance to where the journey is taking us. Doesn't mean we've stopped the journey. Sometimes you may suspend it for a while or for years, or you want to slow down because you're frightened of where it's taking you. And I think it's inevitable there will be a resistance to this process. And one of the most powerful ways in which we can deal with that resistance, if we want to, is by paying attention to what Jesus is and means and is teaching us. Because if we can gain insight through a deep attention to His Word, to His being, to the Scriptures, for example, then that will be a very powerful companion. We will find in him a very powerful companion who will give us the experience of friendship to take us through our fears or resistance. He won't make the journey for us, but he will make the journey with us. In fact, he is making the journey with us, but are we making the journey with him? This is the meaning of Christian faith. And this is the experience of connection, the experience of relationship that is at the heart of Christian identity and discipleship. And this is why, if you meditate and embrace that work of attention, and you are living in the Christian house, I don't just mean institutionalized, but you're living within the Christian family, you're being fed by the Scriptures and by worship. If you can find a place in which you can do that, and I think we're led to it, there's a sense of recognition and affinity, then that's a very powerful combination. And we will both find ourselves and find him, finding himself in us. Good. So, would anyone like to share any thoughts or raise any comments or raise any questions at all? Or would you just like this, please?
When you say we need to let go of desire, we don't have to let go of the desire for God.
Do we? Okay. The question is: do we have to let go of the? When I say we have to let go of desire, I like this expression. I forget exactly who it's from, where he says, which says, "Desire leaves us." If you think of how often we're controlled by our desires, and how when our desires, it looks as if our desires are being fulfilled, we're happy and generous. Okay, we're in a good mood. We get what we want. We've been nice to people. But what happens when it seems as if our desires are not being fulfilled? We can be really mean and frightened and angry and negative and bitter, actually, get, to a stage of bitterness when you feel that your desires are not going to be fulfilled. Bitterness tends to come with age, doesn't it? You don't really get bitter young people. But it's the bitterness would come when, because the younger you are, the more you have hope that you'll be may fulfill all your desires. And but if you haven't yet learned what desire is, then by the time you get to old age, you could be very bitter because you'll think, well, I've never got what I wanted. You may even have forgotten what you wanted, but I didn't get what I wanted. So it's an education of the heart that we need to learn very early on. We don't just have to learn our consumer rights, we need to learn within a spiritual wisdom. So it isn't so much about abandoning our desires. Now, do we let go of our desire for God, is what you're saying. St. John of the Cross actually says we do, we should. Now, it depends what that means. I think the desire for an ice cream is not the same as a desire, as a desire for God. It shouldn't be, should it? Or the sexual desire is not the same as our desire for God. Though we may theoretically compare them. So I think the desire for God is not related to an image, first of all, a particular image. But it's what the Cloud of Unknowing calls a naked longing. It's a naked longing which is a desire in one sense. St. Augustine says the whole of the Christian life is a holy longing or a holy desire. But when you actually look at it, if you experience it for what it is, it's more of a need than a desire. It's that which we can identify or isolate in this state of poverty of spirit, where we have let go of all other desires.
I was thinking about the cloud because the author talks about the dart of longing love that he directs towards this cloud of unknowing.
Yes.
You don't know who or what God is, you only know that you have that longing.
Yes, exactly.
Because I've been following John Mayne's teaching and thinking that longing or desire was somehow misplaced, And then recently I read The Cloud and recovered that realisation that that's okay, because that's at the heart of what we're doing, isn't it?
Precisely. Yes. Yes. Exactly. It's really allowing that inner longing, which we all have. It's part of our humanity, isn't it? But it very often becomes hijacked or by substitutes. I mean, alcohol, for example, Carl Jung said that, you know, alcoholism, he said this in his letter to people who founded AA, is the result of a sort of almost an aborted spiritual search. You think you're not going to make it spiritually, that's what you want, and so you compromise, you collapse into this substitute. Addiction, all kinds of addictions, kind of a substitute for this, or power or money or all sorts of addictions. So I think if we don't make those substitutes, and we don't give up, I mean, it's basically about not giving up and not settling for less. I mean, that's also how John Main describes meditation. That's why he has this sort of quality, very sort of demanding or absolute qualities, is don't settle for anything less than reality. And then we do find this dart of longing love is the best thing we have.
I'm interested in what you say about the scariness of meditation, because it strips away your props,
Yeah.
the things you've relied on all your life, the goals you've had. Suddenly they don't mean so much anymore, and you feel very exposed. And I think what you say about worshipping and being in the right community of people to help through that resonates with me quite a lot. It's finding the right place.
Yes. I think it's allowing it, yes. It's allowing it to find you in a sense as well. Yes. I think, you know, perfectionism is the big... see, perfectionism is about desire, isn't it? You want to be perfect, you want to have it all right, you know, and you're never satisfied until it's all... It fits everything that you want, and ticks all the boxes. Well, that ain't going to happen, is it? So perfectionism is a kind of a rabid desire for being in control too. And so we've really got to. I mean, that would stop us meditating eventually. If you meditated with this perfectionist, I'm going to meditate perfectly. I'm going to. And people get really, you know, especially people who are, you know, in the process of building a highly successful career or have very clear goals in life. Meditating is very disturbing because you say, well, you know, you're not going to blank out all your thoughts. You are not going to be a perfect meditator. You will live with distraction. But in the midst of that distraction, you're doing this work of attention. But it's very difficult for them to understand that at first because they think it's about blanking out the mind or fighting the distractions instead of just accepting that they're there. So in the same way with community or with, I suppose, with any kind of relationship, you accept the real, the way it is, and that may not conform, and it may have some serious flaws in it too, you know. It may be that it doesn't just conform to your perfectionist image, a person who disappoints you because they're not as what you expected them to be, or you know, a community that disappoints you for the same reason. So it may well be that there are flaws, human imperfections in what you are related to. Or it could also be, of course, that you may be exaggerating those imperfections because you've projected your own idea of perfection on it. And you've got to get over it, or get through it. And the best way is, I mean, I think people who condemn others are people who are overcritical of themselves as well, and apply that perfectionism to themselves. and feel that they disappoint themselves. I mean, imagine that feeling that we have, you've all had it, I'm sure, where we disappoint ourselves. It's not a healthy place to be, is it? We're not, it may be a good little wake-up call, but we're not meant to stay there very long. The next thing has to be acceptance. And as soon as we can accept, okay, I made a mistake, or I'm not perfect, or as soon as we do that, then we actually take a step forward on the journey. And that will inevitably reflect itself in our, be reflected in our relationships to others. And that's why I think, meditators who have to practice this self-acceptance, if they're going to continue the discipline, they have to accept their imperfection, and there's no other way. Your image of self is going to change along with your image of God. Then I think it's why you do become more tolerant. The meditator does become more tolerant. That's why it's good for the world.